Yo, what's going on, you guys? KafeisKid here, and welcome to my Halloween special. Now, I almost went a whole calendar month without uploading a video, but Amnesia Rebirth, it said, nope, not today. Now, as most none of you know, I love horror games. Outlast is one of my favorite games of all time, and I even made a video about how Amnesia: The Dark Descent revolutionized the horror genre. Speaking of Amnesia, the third entry in the series dropped this month, but did it live up to the hype of that first entry in the franchise? Let's find out. In both mechanics and atmosphere, Amnesia Rebirth really is the perfect successor to the first two games. In Amnesia: The Dark Descent, developed by Frictional Games, you play as a man named Daniel who is suffering from amnesia and experiences narrative flashbacks through personal memories and different forms of documentation. In Amnesia: A Machine for Pigs, developed by the Chinese Room, you play as a man named Oswald suffering from amnesia-like symptoms after being struck by a fever, experiencing flashbacks and coming across different documentations and phone calls to regain his memory. In Amnesia Rebirth, you play as a woman named Tassie who, once again, is experiencing amnesia and discovers the truth about what is happening to her and her family through narration-style flashbacks and letters left behind by her husband and colleagues. The point that I'm trying to make is that this game stays very true to the formula of the Amnesia games. If you've played The Dark Descent, you'll know what I mean when I say that the jump-in flashbacks that take you out of the game are extremely prevalent and recognizable here in Rebirth, and you'll instantly feel like you're playing a successor to the original game within the first 5 minutes. Another aspect that made a prominent return is the fear mechanic, which was missing from A Machine for Pigs. Okay, honestly, I don't want to dwell on it for too long, but I just want to say that I really don't think that A Machine for Pigs is that good. It's clear that the reins were taken by a different developer, and it just doesn't really fill the same desires that The Dark Descent and Rebirth do for me. But to avoid sitting on where this game falls in the Amnesia family for too long, I kind of want to just hop into the gameplay. I'll try to avoid spoilers as much as possible, and I'll save the story for the second half of the review. Rebirth honors the tried and true lantern mechanic of the previous two games, but it introduces a genius new mechanic as well through matches. I can't stress enough how smart this mechanic is. I haven't verified this, so take it with a grain of salt, but it feels like the lantern runs out of oil much quicker in this entry than in the first two, but I could be wrong. However, for when you're out of oil and the lantern isn't an option, which is pretty often, you have matches to compensate. These are the equivalent of tinderboxes, as they can be used to light candles and torches. However, you can also actually ignite them and use them as a light source while traversing through the world of the game. You're gonna need these a lot because oil is few and far between, and again, it runs out pretty quickly. But the reason that they're such a smart horror mechanic is because if you're relying on them as your only source of light, you're also watching the fire quickly burn out right in front of you at your fingertips, knowing that as soon as the flame extinguishes, you're back in complete darkness. Additionally, if you move too quickly or if you run with a match out, it blows out and you're left back in complete darkness. So if you only have a match lit as a source of light because you're being chased by an enemy and need to see the path in front of you, guess what? You can't run. It's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation that creates for some incredibly haunting experiences throughout the game. The puzzles in this game are fantastic. I don't want to say that they're hard because I don't want to look stupid, but they're pretty tough. They're challenging and complex, but they also are entirely manageable and never really manage to feel unfair or obnoxious. They're enough of a hurdle to give you a much needed boost of serotonin without getting in the way of your enjoyment of the game. For example, there's a gorgeous puzzle in a giant catacomb area of the game that both looks amazing and is satisfying to complete. When you're without a source of light and you're experiencing the fear mechanic, the screen has a creepy crawling movement type border which instantly lets you know that you need to find light as soon as possible. In addition to this, anytime you're experiencing a drop in sanity, there's a heartbeat sound and demented whispers that stick with you until you've found light again, which only adds to the pressure to get out of the darkness as soon as possible. It's genuinely terrifying. Also, when you quote-unquote die in this game, your body really just gets transported back to a pre-designated room for that area that you're in, kinda similar to Vita Chambers in the first two Bioshock games. You don't really ever die, which for me does reduce the stakes of being caught just a little bit, but it's not enough to dramatically affect the fear factor of encountering enemies throughout the game. There's one more gameplay mechanic that I want to touch on, but I need to delve into spoiler territory to really make sense of it, so I'm going to jump into the story now, which means that from this point on, heavy spoilers. You have been warned. Alright, so the story begins with protagonist Tazi, her husband Salim, and a group of fellow expeditioners on a flight to northern Africa. After a brief introduction to the main character, the plane that they're on crash lands in a desert in Algeria, where Tazi wakes up to the entire crew missing and no memory of what occurred. The initial objective of the game is just to find her crewmates and husband, but not long into the journey, we find Salim dead in a cave and learn that Tazi is pregnant with their second child, the younger sibling of their eldest daughter, Elise. The objective very quickly becomes getting home safely so that Salim's memory can live on through Tazi, Elise, and their unborn child. And okay, so the reason that I waited until now to discuss one of the game's core mechanics is because it actually has to do with Tazi's pregnancy and her connection with the baby. In moments of darkness and terror, Tazi can take a moment to check in with the baby and reduce her fear levels. Having conversations with your stomach is actually really relatable to me, so it kept me pretty immersed.
Oh, what's that, baby? You want to go get some Taco Bell? Okay, we'll go get some Taco Bell.
It definitely is a unique and interesting mechanic that makes the game stand out, but it honestly hardly ever really changes the gameplay, and it felt out of place more often than not. And while it was intended to add a sense of solace to what was an otherwise chilling experience, most of the time the baby kicking just freaks me out because it always came out of nowhere when the game was at its most tense. Throughout the game, Tazi comes across a lot of weird supernatural rifts in reality that hint at something much deeper than just an everyday monster haunting a lone woman in a desert. Below the sands of the Algerian desert lies an inexplicable world with weird green thunderstorms, and it's in this setting that Tazi encounters a spirit woman who, I guess we'll call Ellen Page, assists her a couple of times by pointing her in the right direction or informing her of some things about her pregnancy. The main takeaway is just remember Ellen Page because she's going to be important later. Tazi also frequently experiences flashbacks in which it becomes pretty obvious that she and her crew have already been to the places that we're adventuring through, implying that a lot happened between the plane crash and when we take control of Tazi after she wakes up at the site. This is equally as important, but again, we'll get to that later. The first major landmark that we encounter after finding her husband's body is an abandoned French fort, where there are obvious signs of some kind of monster or demon still haunting the empty buildings. Upon entering the first structure of the fort, Tazi finally makes contact with one of her fellow members, a Dr. Metzier, via radio, who informs her that he and one other surviving crew member, Yasmin, are at a village down the road. In the process of making her way to the village with the doctor and Yasmin, Tazi frequently encounters remnants of that supernatural world that exists beneath the desert. We also discover that Tazi and Salim's first daughter, Elise, passed away from an undisclosed illness. A good chunk of the rest of the game is essentially just bouncing back and forth between the catacombs and ghost structures of the abandoned supernatural underworld, and attempting to reach the village that the doctor mentioned, but in the process we discover that the remaining crew members, aside from Dr. Metzier and Yasmin, have either passed away or turned into the monsters of the game known as harvesters. We'll call the illness that turns them into harvesters, COVID-19. It starts to become increasingly obvious that Tazi too is also transforming into a harvester herself. Beginning the final act, we finally reach the village where we encounter an already turned Yasmin who breaks through the clutches of COVID-19 long enough to help Tazi run away from her towards where the doctor is. This results in a really sick chase sequence where Tazi is literally in labor giving birth to her child while running away from a now aggressive harvester Yasmin. Just as Tazi is about to be killed by harvester Yasmin, Dr. Metzier saves her life by shooting and killing Yasmin. Dr. Metzier then assists Tazi in the labor of her child, who Tazi has since named Amari. After Amari is born, Dr. Metzier ties down Tazi, steals the child, and runs away into a rift leading to the supernatural world. We follow the doctor and chase him into the underworld, where we learn that he stole Amari as an offering to give to Ellen Page to cure himself, because he and Tazi too are both suffering from COVID-19. The final major revelation of Tazi's amnesia is that the crew had already traveled to this underworld tower together, where Ellen Page offered to cure and save them all from COVID-19 if Tazi were willing to give up her unborn child, who Ellen Page tells us is suffering from the same illness that took Tazi and Salim's first child, Elise. Tazi refused to give up Amari to Ellen Page, and as a result, the rest of the crew suffered, Salim died, and we understand why Dr. Metzier turned on Tazi and stole Amari. In a fit of rage, Tazi kills Dr. Metzier, and Ellen Page tells Tazi that she can take care of Amari with her supernatural technology known as Vitae. Additionally, Tazi cannot raise Amari anyway because she is transforming into a harvester due to her COVID-19. If Tazi leaves Amari with Ellen Page, Ellen promises her a peaceful transition into becoming a harvester. This is the final sequence of the game, and you have 3 alternate endings that can happen depending on how you respond, with the first option being that you can peacefully give up Amari to Ellen and resign to becoming a harvester. This is considered the harvester ending accordingly. The second ending involves using a teleporter and taking Amari back to Paris, giving you what is referred to as the provider ending. The third major ending involves using a serum you received earlier in the game to kill Ellen Page and destroy the supernatural underworld, killing yourself and Amari in the process. This is dubbed as the Iconoclast ending. Ultimately, there are really no good endings for the player. I'd argue that the best ending is the first one because, as far as we know, at least Amari lives. But in the second ending, it's presumed that Tazi will eventually still turn into a harvester and Amari will succumb to the same illness that took Elise. And in the third ending, Tazi prevents this from happening to anyone in the future, but she still sacrifices herself and the baby in the process. I think that this adds a really interesting dynamic to the campaign as a whole, and I kinda love how uniquely bleak and morbid it all is. Amnesia Rebirth's story is by no means the greatest of all time, or even really a top contender, but I was really satisfied with it by the end regardless. It's complex and dynamic without being overly convoluted or indigestible. It's easily my favorite story of the 3 mainline Amnesia games. Alright, with that out of the way, let's wrap this up. Now that everything's been established, I want to go over some pros and cons of the game as a whole, and my overall final thoughts on the project. Alright, time to talk about the good. You already heard me gush about this, but the match mechanic is awesome. I love when a horror game nudges you into utilizing things that inherently make the game scarier, but also feel natural to the world of the game. Things like the video camera in Outlast, the close corner building in Slender, and the matches here in Amnesia Rebirth. The enemy encounters in this game are done so well. I can only think of a handful of times that you actually have to balance accomplishing progression in the game while also worrying about a harvester, a searcher, or Ellen Page. The atmospheric horror is balanced perfectly with the forced horror gameplay, and no points did I feel that artificial fear was being forced down my throat as a result of the game having me run and hide from an enemy just for the sake of it. I also want to add that I really love Tazi as a main character. She's fairly realistic and level-headed when it comes to dealing with the threat of demon ghoul monsters and a ghost queen while escaping a barren desert in northern Africa. I was rooting for her to make it out alive, but I also understood why she took risks and cut corners when she did. She also went through a lot. She is seriously Bad Luck Brian reincarnate in this game. Finally, I know I just talked about it, but again, I thought that the story was incredibly well done. It's very easy for games like this to get too convoluted for their own good, or pace the story beats in ways that lose the audience entirely, but I didn't feel like Rebirth fell into that trap. It also offers different tiers of narrative immersion. You can have a pretty good grasp of what's going on without ever reading a note or a stone plate left behind to fill in the story gaps, but if you want to dive into the deeper lore of the game, you're more than welcome to do that as well. As long as you pay attention to the forced flashbacks and the dot connecting scenes that everyone experiences, you really shouldn't struggle to see where the story is going by the end of it all. Okay, now time to discuss a little bit of the not so perfect aspects of the game. The game can get really dark at times, like literally dark. So dark in fact that it ironically made things less scary for me at one point. There's an area in the game where you're kind of traversing a maze while being chased by a former colleague turned harvester that was so dark that I had to just dumb luck my way through the entire thing. I got caught so many times and interacted with the harvester capture animation so many times that eventually it became almost comically unthreatening to me. Again, because you don't ever actually die in this game, you're just transported back to pre-designated areas. This is explained as Tazi having moments of weakness due to her COVID-19 diagnosis and allowing the harvester tendencies to take over her mental for a brief period of time. This next one isn't a major issue, but I played the game on console for my first run through and I had some pretty significant frame drops during a lot of the more demanding supernatural sections. This next one isn't really an issue unique to this game, but for me it kind of just became a little bit less scary as it went on. It's a common issue in horror games that as I play more of the game and learn the tendencies of the monsters and get closer looks at the animations of the enemies, they start to lose a little bit of their fear factor. This game did a phenomenal job at never really getting stale with its scare tactics though, so those are nitpicks that I'm very easily willing to forgive. The next thing I want to note is that this game itself is pretty short and ends between what I would imagine is about the 7 to 10 hour mark for most players. But again, this isn't something that I can hold too much against it. Most horror games are on the shorter side, which I would guess is a result of the reasons that I just stated. In addition to those, the inherent development of most of these style horror games involves exploration and puzzles, and there's only so much of this that you can really do without it getting staler by the hour, and Amnesia Rebirth never really got to a point where I was ready for it to end, which is only a good thing. It's also only $30 and by no means advertised as a massive feature-length game, so again, this is just another small thing worth noting, but I'm not really going to hold it against the game too much. Alright, that's Amnesia Rebirth in a brief Ellen Page-sized nutshell. I hope that this video is helpful to any prospective buyers or horror fans that wanted to relive the Amnesia experience for a short period of time. I really did enjoy this game a lot, and while I didn't have monumental expectations going into it, I came out of the game incredibly satisfied with what I think was an exceptional follow-up to the first two Amnesia games. It honored the style and fundamental gameplay and storytelling mechanics of the first game, while also offering something fresh and representative of the current generation of gaming. All in all, I think I would give Amnesia Rebirth somewhere in the ballpark of a 7.5 to an 8 out of 10. If you like these kinds of games, you really won't regret giving this entry a shot. And I really can't see anyone who enjoyed Amnesia: The Dark Descent being displeased with this game. If you guys enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing for more video game analysis content like this in the future. With that in mind, please have a safe and happy Halloween, and I will see you guys in the next one.